Welcome to the Farming on Purpose podcast, a podcast for farmers and ranchers ready to shift for a stronger future. Today's challenges in agriculture are new, but the grit and determination required to be successful are not. On the Farming on Purpose podcast, you'll hear how producers of all sizes and practices are moving mountains for things they believe in, all in the name of an industry that keeps growing and innovating for a stronger food system and stronger farm families. I'm your host, Lexi Wright, and I'm excited to discuss where producers are finding success, challenging the status quo, striving for better, and keeping our heritage alive, all while producing the food we depend on. Welcome back to Farming on Purpose. I'm here today with Stacy Bronec. Stacy is a freelance writer who lives in rural Montana with her husband and their 3 kids on their family farm and ranch. And years ago, Stacy, you dreamt of big city life and then fell in love with a farmer and moved to the middle of nowhere. But you use stories to make sense of the beauty and challenges of rural life, which is why I asked you to be on the podcast, because I came across your writing and absolutely loved the way that you painted the picture of what rural and farm life and motherhood looks like. And so I'm so excited to connect with you today. You write for a local magazine. You have some personal essays that have appeared in various publications. So there's lots of places people can check out your writing. And then you also do a monthly newsletter on your website and on Substack. But today I'm just really excited to learn more about your story, kind of how you got to the farm. That was a really brief overview of what your journey to farm wife life looked like. So I'd love to hear more about that and what you're focusing on these days.
Well, thank you for asking me to come on, Lexi. So I grew up in a small town in Wyoming, and I always wanted to be, my dream was to be Katie Couric and be a news broadcaster. But that didn't happen. I ended up going to college at the University of Wyoming and studied communication. And then I moved to Billings, Montana to do grad school. And I got my master's in school counseling. And I was working as a school counselor in Bozeman, Montana. And I became friends with a group of people there, and we tailgated and for football games. And that is where I met my husband, was tailgating at a football game. And then it all happened really fast. We were engaged within 3 months of starting dating. We got married 6 months later, and I moved to the farm in the middle of nowhere. We live about 40 minutes from the closest small town, and that's where our kids go to school. And so that's how I ended up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, as tailgating at a football game.
Well, that took quite a turn then. I was hearing, I hadn't realized until you said that. We have had some really good love stories shared on the podcast of how people meet their farmer or how they meet someone and then they start a farming journey together. So that's so special. So when you made the jump and got married to your husband, moved to the farm, was that expected? Was he planning the entire time to go back to the farm, or what did that kind of decision process look like for you guys?
So there really wasn't a decision for me. It was my husband. So when we met, I was 29. My husband was 33. He was we were still tailgating like we were in college, but we weren't in college anymore. So we were both well past college. So he had already been on the farm for probably 10 years. So he had gone to school and was a CPA, but then went back to the farm. That's where he knew he wanted to be. So for me, it wasn't really a decision of going back to the farm. I knew if I wanted to be with him that it was going to the farm, because as we all know, farms and ranches don't move. And so I moved. It was about a 4-hour move across the state. And so I just knew when I met him that he was pretty clear from the beginning that, being on the farm, that's what he wanted. And he wanted me to be happy. We, had many conversations. He didn't want me to do something I didn't want to do. But, it was pretty clear, if this isn't a life you can live, I don't want to force you to do it. But hindsight, like I didn't really know what I was signing up for. Like it was easy to say, yes, I want to live on a farm. But then when you actually live on a farm, it's a lot different than, because I just really had no idea what it was going to look like. But so that's how we got here.
Yeah, I think that is true for most people. If you didn't grow up on a farm and then you move to one, it's like you kind of know what's happening and what you're getting into, but really it's a shock when you kind of jump into the day to day. At least I feel like that was for me. And I grew up on a hobby farm, so I had like a little bit of understanding, but actually on a production farm, big change to what I kind of thought it would be. Is there things that like stick out to you from those early days that you were like, oh my gosh, this is not what I expected, or this was a big surprise?
I mean, it was just like, which we all, talk about, like farming isn't necessarily just like your career, it's your lifestyle. And like, I just didn't know how much of my life was going to revolve around the rain. And if it's going to rain, then my husband is like hustling to do the work he needs to get done ahead of the rain. And it doesn't matter if it's a Saturday or a Sunday, the work has to get done when it has to get done. And, we dated and were engaged so quickly that I never even had a full year of like seeing the farm in action, like even from an outside perspective. Like the summer, like my first harvest, we were engaged, but I was living in town. And so I would drive out and ride in the combine for a couple hours with my husband. I was like, oh, this is so romantic. Like we're riding in the combine together. And then I would get in my car and drive back to my apartment in town. So I wasn't bringing meals to the field like I am now. So it was just a lot different, and we raise Black Angus beef or Black Angus cattle, and we are a grain operation. So we're busy like all year long. We're calving right now. And so we do all of our calving in the barn. So it's pretty time intensive for our crew, 24 hours a day. And then in the summer, we do all the different crops, which we could talk about later. But anyway, so it's just a year round busy. It seems like the seasons, I wasn't prepared for the ups and downs of the busy and slow seasons.
Mm-hmm. I think becoming a farm wife or a farm mom, or however you want to say that, a person who lives on a farm and is in charge of cooking and cleaning and doing those things, that is part of the role that I never knew was going to be such a huge part of my life. Like in high school was always like, I wanted to be doing the on the farm things. Like I wanted to be out there with the cattle and in the tractor. And that's how I thought my life was going to go. And you don't really think about what that looks like big picture when you have kids to take care of and when that doesn't like logistically make sense. So that was is still a huge shock for me because we just moved to a bigger farm this year. And so my role has increased a lot in that way. And I'm just like, I don't know how to juggle all this. I don't know like what I'm doing, how to do field meals, when to do field meals, because sometimes it feels like you call them. I don't know if you've experienced this. You call them and you're like, hey, what can I do to help? And it's like bad timing. Don't call right now. Or, stuff like that. Yeah. Did you have anything that's happened as you kind of took on some of those roles?
Yeah, thinking back, and this is something I've written about, was I didn't realize like how much of my life being married to a farmer would revolve around cooking and feeding people. Like, just other than my family, and like the early years, like my husband would stop by the house and he'd say, hey, can you make lunch for the guys real quick? And I was like, panic, like I don't know, when am I going to make a group of people in like an hour notice, and that just really, I didn't trust myself as a cook like I do now. And so now I kind of start to have anticipated more when he needs it, and we've established more of our, the roles of like, I'm pretty much the one that does all the harvest meals, and we bring a full dinner out to the field in the evening. Everyone packs their lunches. So we have like those defined. So I know I'm not going to get asked to bring a lunch out during harvest, but I do bring dinner out. But then like in the other seasons, like when we're seeding in the spring or seeding in the fall, like there were a few years where we didn't really define like if I was going to bring dinner out. And then I kind of started to feel guilty, like the guys are still out seeding and it's like 6, 7, 8 o'clock and I know they don't have dinner. But I feel like my husband, I think he kind of was hesitant to ask me to take on more. And, you know, we have 3 kids now. So over the years, we kept adding kids. And so I think he was nervous to ask me to do one more thing because it is a lot of work to bring the food out to the field. But now I just feel like we're kind of like, I'm more confident in myself as a cook. You know, we've been married 10 years. And so I feel like I'm less surprised by his asks now because I kind of learned to anticipate when it's going to be needed.
Yeah, as you kind of stepped into that role more and figured out how to do that, I've definitely been in the same place of like, hey, can you cook for these people? And we're going to come in like 45 minutes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Is there anything that you did along the lines to kind of that helped you figure things out? Or was it just, you know, learn by doing and over time, or what's helped you along the way?
I feel like I really have had a good, like my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law are on the farm. And so my mother-in-law did, you know, all the meals for harvest. And then I feel like there was kind of a point when one summer she just kind of looked at me and she was like, you're going to do this next summer. Like, and I was like, okay. So, and then she does all the meals during calving. We have a big lunch during calving and everyone comes into her house. So I feel like for me, it was just kind of like by example of what she was cooking and what my sister-in-law was cooking. And then I just kind of, you know, came up with a few meals that I felt like I could come up with a short amount of time that I felt confident in cooking, because I definitely have tried like a new recipe on the guys. And then I feel bad because I'm like, that really wasn't very good. And so I try and cook things that I know will turn out. And I am a huge fan of the Pioneer Women's cookbooks, and that's where I get a lot of my recipes. So she's like my inspiration that if I could be the Pioneer Woman, that is my goal. But the Montana version.
The Montana version. Oh, I love that. That's perfect. Isn't that all of our goals? Like, let's just be the Pioneer Woman and be able to cook all of this amazing food. That'd be great.
And have someone else clean up after you, though. I think
that's half the battle. No joke. Keeping everything clean. So when you guys get in a season like that, and we just kind of jumped in right here, but when you get in a season like in harvest and it's like a daily thing of trying to figure all that out, do you have any structure or routines that you try to do every day, or figuring out what you're going to cook, how you're going to get it to the field? What are maybe some things that you've picked up along the way that you can share with folks who are maybe doing this for the first few times?
I definitely have to meal plan. You know, we live, like I said, 40 minutes from a small town, and we live an hour from a bigger city. So I get out I actually keep a list, and it's in my drawer, and I write down all the things I want to cook for harvest, and I refer back. So I have the years on top of what I've made. And then so I can refer back and go, oh yeah, that's a good meal. Because otherwise it feels like you're like, what should I make? And so I keep a list of what I cook every year during harvest on a piece of notebook paper. So then each week I just look at the calendar and I have my meal plan sheet and I write down what I want to cook for the harvest meal. And then I order my groceries and then I go to town and I get the groceries. So I definitely have to have a schedule, because how far we are from town, like if I'm out of butter or milk, I can't just drive down the street and grab it. So I definitely keep a schedule, and then keeping a track of meals that I cook year to year is really helpful, because then I don't have to feel like I'm recreating the wheel every year on what I want to cook. I have my standard. Everyone knows that I make meatball subs, and they know the things that I bring out, and they get excited when it's their favorite thing because I do the same meals. So for me, that definitely helps, is having the structure of having a meal plan. We take all of ours out. So I load all the food into coolers and put a towel on top in the cooler, and I load it into the pickup. And I have a chairs and table set up in the back of my pickup. And one thing I found that was really helpful a few years ago is I have a bucket, or not a bucket, but like a laundry detergent container that's empty now, but it has the like the pump on top. And so so I fill it with water and hot water and soap. And then I take that to the field and the guys can pump water out of it to wash their hands in the field. And that is always helpful. And this year, which this isn't on the food part, but that my husband loved, is I put in all the combines and the tractors, I put baby wipes, and the guys love that to have to like wipe their face and their hands just when it gets dusty and stuff. So definitely for me, planning ahead is how I get through the busy seasons.
Those are some genius tips right there. So I'm going to have to go back to listen to this and write those down later. But I love the idea of keeping track of what you do from year to year too. So you can kind of remember like, oh yeah, this one was a hit and can do that again. That's cool. Mm-hmm. And that's just one piece, like the meal preparation and feeding people, especially during like the busy seasons of calving or harvest, is just one piece of the big picture. What are some of the other things that have come along your way that have been responsibilities that maybe you didn't anticipate or were something that you had to grow into?
I guess like cooking is my main responsibility. And then with the kids and I don't know, just running the house, and my husband is gone and keeping things flowing, and the kids are in school, like I'm the one that's, making sure they're getting off the bus and, that's pretty much my main job. And then occasionally my husband will call which I refer to it as bringing in the C squad when he needs me to drive a combine. And so just like jumping in and doing things like that. But yeah, for me, for the most part, cooking is kind of my main responsibility during the busy seasons.
Which if you're doing that, from scratch or partially from scratch, like that's a whole thing. That's more than enough for one person. And probably, like you mentioned that you have family on his side that has kind of helped in the past and helped you learn that role. If you didn't have that, what would that have looked like for you? Or do you think that there would have been other opportunities for you to kind of learn those skills or figure out what was needed or just trial and error?
Yeah, I think, because like that his family farm and ranch was already established when I got here, it wasn't like we were starting out our own operation or, so I feel like I don't know what it would have looked like because if I hadn't seen, my husband's mom making meals for, the things, maybe I wouldn't have even thought of doing it because it wasn't what I saw. And so I feel like just seeing how they operated, I guess kind of was just how I learned that that's kind of how our operation works. And I know every operation is different, but so that's just, seeing them in that role, and over time gave me more confidence in being able to do it myself.
For sure. Well, we've talked a little bit when we were jumping on here today about how social media plays a big role in our lives as rural women. We don't have a lot of opportunity to interact with people outside of that on a day-to-day basis. So I use social media a lot to try to like pick up little things about this because we are on a family farm, but we do not farm with family, I guess is the best way to put that. So I'm trying to learn some of these things just by watching other people on social media and reading blogs about what they do and what works for them. But it can be kind of a trip on social media to navigate. What's your experience been with that?
Well, early on, I feel like when I first got married, Instagram was pretty new in 2013, 2012. And so I definitely, I got on, I switched, I was on Instagram and I started following more women in ag as, I'd married a farmer. And I'll be honest, when I first got on, looking at other women in ag, I really felt like at times I wasn't doing enough because I saw that, the women sharing, they're driving the tractors and they're driving the combines and they had their kids in the tractor with them. And I felt like, am I not doing what I'm supposed to be doing? It was hard because I felt like maybe I wasn't doing enough. And then on the other hand, then I also felt like all the people, women were sharing all the beautiful things like the pretty sunsets and all the wonderful things about farm life, but no one was sharing anything about how hard it was. And I really struggled with that because I felt like, am I doing something wrong that farm life is only hard for me? what is wrong with me? Like, why am I not like loving every minute of farm life? And so after a few years, I started writing more, and I had always loved writing as a kid, but I pretty much had stopped writing through college and didn't think about it. But then I had a moment when I had my 2 kids that I just felt like I had to write again. And so I started writing, and so I started slowly sharing a little bit on Instagram, and I made a blog, and I started submitting essays for publication and started getting published places. And so I started just slowly sharing a little bit more of like the challenges I was feeling, like the loneliness I felt as a farm wife. And then adding in kids, like motherhood can be really lonely too. And then add on top of that, your husband working 16 hours a day and you live in the middle of nowhere. So I tried to share some of that. And I started hearing back, women would comment back and say, me too. And so I kind of felt like I knew I wasn't the only one, but it was really kind of scary to step out and post this because I was afraid of getting the backlash from people saying like, how come you don't love it all the time? Or farm life is wonderful. And so I've really tried to just embrace that yes, there are beautiful parts of farm life and I love it. And I think it's a wonderful place for my kids to be raised, and they're learning so many things. My 9-year-old can drive a combine. There's just so many great things, but I also want to be honest about the challenges because I feel like it can be really lonely when you feel like you're the only one feeling a certain way. And I don't want other women to feel like how I felt 10 years ago.
Absolutely. I think there's so much content that you can consume on social media. It can be overwhelming. And for me, I think sometimes I get stuck in like little corners of social media where all you see is one thing. And it's like repeated from all these different people of, one ideal way of doing things. And it's like, oh my gosh, so I could never achieve that, or I could never do it that way. And you start to blame yourself or wonder if you're doing everything wrong. And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get out of this. Mm-hmm. When folks can share the parts that are hard too, it is so refreshing to see that. It's so refreshing to see like this person is a real person who struggles with pieces too. Maybe not necessarily the same things I struggle with all the time, but at least they're not on their A game every single day like I assumed they were. One thing that stands out for me is definitely how to navigate having kids on the farm and letting them be involved or helping them be involved and what that looks like. I felt like that was a big thing that I noticed other people doing. Like you mentioned, they were taking their kids along with them in the combine, or they were having them work in the processing pen and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that or how to teach my kids to do that, how to make sure that they're safe while they're doing it, that kind of thing. And as a mom, that is so much harder to navigate then, because it's not just you, it's like how you are raising your kids. What ages are your kids now?
My son is 9, my middle child is 7, and my youngest is 3.
So close together and still very much so in the young kid phase. Has that been something that you've had to figure out how to navigate, like the motherhood paired with farm life? What is that? Excuse me. What has that been like to kind of work through? Have there been any challenges that have come up for you?
Like I said earlier, the loneliness with motherhood, and then add on top of it, living in a rural area. Yeah, there's, definitely been times like, back to the social media where I, see women who like the suggestions of like getting to spending more time with their husband in the tractor. Like I've seen like the advice, like go drop your kids off at daycare and then go ride with your husband in the tractor. But that's never been an option for me, to drive 40 minutes to drop the kids off, to drive 40 minutes back home, to drive 40, to go pick up, so like stuff like that was. So I feel like with social media, it was hard for me because I was like, yeah, that's great advice, but that doesn't really work for me. And as the kids have gotten older, my husband takes the kids with him more, and my son is like a farmer in training. He loves farming and going. And So there's definitely been times when I've had to kind of take a deep breath and we have conversations with our kids about being safe around equipment and around the cattle. But then I have to kind of just let go and trust that my husband is, keeping the kids safe when I'm not there, when I'm at home. But that was definitely a challenge at the beginning for me when he would take, one or two of the kids. He'd be leaving and I'd be like, don't let him get ran over by a tractor. And he's like, I know, honey, and so it's hard for me when they're out of my sight and so it's just having regular conversations with the kids about being safe, and around the augers and there's just so many things that they could get into. But yeah, and definitely just having to let go a little bit and trust that my husband is keeping them safe too. And, having the conversations with the kids, but yeah, it can definitely be a challenge.
Definitely. Especially it's hard to remember that they probably do things differently when we're not there and the kids are along versus when we are there and the kids are along. Cause that's always my biggest thing that I noticed. I'm like, you guys are so focused on the work you're doing. These kids are just going to hurt themselves because they're running around, but they probably do a different one. I'm not there to watch the kids. But the other thing you mentioned about motherhood and living out in the middle of nowhere is the loneliness. It's a lot of alone time. It's, to me, I think, something that I look at as a big responsibility that's kind of added to your plate to be in charge of your mindset without really any kind of input. It's just you have to figure this out because you are the one who's in charge of how your home runs and how your kids, you have to set the tone for the home and for your kids and how this is all going to go. And that's a huge responsibility as you are learning things as well in a kind of a different lifestyle.
I'm so glad you could join us today. You can support the mission of the Farming on Purpose podcast and be part of the tribe dedicated to building ag legacies at farmingonpurpose.com/shop. You'll find apparel, office supplies, stickers, planners, and more, all inspired by the people living out ag legacies every day.
Are there any things that you do in your home to kind of set the stage or make sure that you're prepared for big seasons, busy seasons, things to help the kids kind of adjust to changes on the farm?
Yeah, it's definitely an adjustment. I feel like, during the busy seasons, the kids get used to, and it's shifting over the years, as the kids get older. But several years ago when I was home with all three kids all day, they weren't really used to their dad being home during the day. So we do, bedtime and everything alone. And then we had to it was a readjustment period when my husband would be back home for, dinner and bedtime. So it's definitely I don't know how I've prepared for that other than just knowing it's kind of like a reentry process when my husband comes back home and he's home more. But ahead of time, I really try during harvest, especially not every week, but once every couple weeks, I'll ask my mother-in-law to cook for me. And then I'll take the day to go to town without any of the kids and just to have a break, go to Target or, get a coffee or get lunch with friends. So I feel like that really kind of helps me because I do start to get burned out during harvest of being alone a lot and the responsibility of all the kids. And, sometimes it seems like all they want to do is fight and I'm the only one at home. And so definitely taking breaks when I can during the busy seasons has been helpful for me in trying not to get too burned out. And also what I've tried to do, which we haven't done that last couple of years, but I've tried to plan a quick trip after harvest just for my husband and I, just maybe even going overnight somewhere just so that I have something to look forward to and that's on in my mind, in just a couple of weeks, we're going to get to go to this concert or we're going to get to go do this. So that kind of helps me with my mindset, having something to look forward to.
That's really neat. That's a good idea. I resonated a lot with some of the things that you've written about being kind of stuck in the hard season for a while. And then all of a sudden you see something beautiful on the farm and it kind of is how did I miss this before when I was in this hard season? For me, I think a lot of that came when my kids were really, really young. They're still young, but when they were really young and it was is this ever gonna be different? You know, am I ever going to get past this phase? And then one day you wake up and you are. But your writing on that was very inspiring to me. Do you want to talk a little bit more about kind of how that's been for you?
Yeah, it definitely. I just had another moment a few weeks ago when the 5 of us were in the tractor feeding the cows, and I just kind of like looked around, and it was like no one needed a pacifier, no one was missing a nap. Everyone, the kids, you know, no one, I didn't have to have a baby in the car seat or in the sling or on my lap. Like everyone was sitting in the tractor and watching and talking about the feeding the cows, and I just had this feeling of like I let out a breath, like felt like for the first time it didn't feel really hard, like all of us getting into the tractor together. I mean, 5 of us in the tractor is a lot of work, but like it just didn't feel like it felt like. For a moment I wondered, like, have I been too harsh on how I felt about motherhood and farm life the last 10 years? Like, but I feel like you can really only have hindsight once you get ahead. And so I just trying to remind myself that what you feel like in the moments when it is a hard season is real. And even in your mind, you know, like in a few years, it's going to be easier. That's still a few years away. So I feel like I try and let myself feel those feelings of that. Yes, this is challenging, but yes, I still love my life. And for me, like writing about it is how I process a lot of that. And so for, you know, just like remembering that it's okay for it to feel hard. But just know that it's not going to last forever. And then you're sad because your kids are older and no one's a baby anymore. And which is exciting, but also sad too.
My youngest is about to turn 3, and I saw one of the little babies at her daycare the other day. And I was like, that was the first time that I was like, oh, like I kind of missed that a little bit. I mean, that little cute chubby thing that you carry around on your hip. But I think that I also process like negative experiences or challenging experiences through writing. And it's kind of something that it's hard to balance for me. Like the positive and the negative in my writing. Because sometimes I'll look back at what I've written and I'm like, oh my gosh, like you sound like you hate your life. You sound like you're so upset about everything. And it's not that way. It's just that I'm processing the negative or the challenging through writing. The happy I can process without that. But the sharing of both together, I think when we share about those things on social media is so powerful. So I wondered, is there things that you found like a lot of joy in lately on the farm or the ranch that you like look forward to, and are seasons that you're like, yes, this is the good part?
Right. I mean, I catch myself taking pictures of sunrises and sunsets a lot. There's so, you know, on this prairie, you know, we have 0 buildings around us, you know, other than our farm stuff. And so there's just, that is beautiful. I really love calving, which I feel like I can say that as someone who is not in the barn 24/7, doing a lot of the labor intensive work, but I love the calves. And this is where my husband and I differentiate. Like he doesn't want anything to do, like loves the farming side. He doesn't love the cows. So that's where we kind of differentiate. But I, you know, just love seeing the baby calves, and seeing the kids get to see the calves is always, you know, exciting. And I feel like for the first time this summer was one of the first years I didn't dread harvest as much as I had in the past. I was kind of, you know, I mean, it was exciting when it was over, don't get me wrong, but it was also, it just felt like it wasn't as hard. And I think that was because the kids are getting older. I'm not, you know, trying to cook a full meal with a baby and a toddler and a preschooler. And so I felt like just getting to enjoy it, you know, a little bit. And there was a couple days where I did go out and run the combine, and it was really fun to, you know, get out. And I would love to do that more, but it's also, you know, with the cooking part, like how that to do both of those is kind of a challenge to get to do both roles. But just like little things like that, you know, spending the day in the combine was something out of the norm for me. So those are kind of some of my favorite parts.
Yeah, trying to do both roles is so hard. It's like my favorite thing to try to challenge myself. I'm like, I can go do that and still have all the food ready and it'll be perfect. Like, no, you can't. That will not work. But Well, I wanted to ask more about your writing because that's a very, I think, like, it sounds like it's been a big help to you as you process things. And then also you're just very talented at it and you are featured in different things. How has that been part of like motherhood, and how do you fit that in to make it something that you enjoy and are good at and can still find time for?
It's definitely been a challenge. I've felt guilty over the years when I basically kind of like ignored the kids to go and write in my office, or I try and get up, now that my kids are older, I get up at 5 to try and write before the kids get up. But I've, taken a lot of writing workshops over the years. So I feel like I've just really tried to become a better writer, and I'm still trying every day. And, but for me, it really has helped process like my feelings in motherhood. And because I'm not a very like talkative person. So a lot of times like people will read something I have written and be like, they had no idea I felt that way, because I'm better at expressing myself through words than talking about it. So I think just even for my husband and I, like he's probably read some of my essays and been like, oh, wow, I didn't realize she felt quite that way. So I feel like it's been good for me to have also like an outlet outside of farm life. I do write a lot about farm life, but that's like my passion is writing. And so getting to do, that has really been helpful for me as a mom. And I hope that, I tell my kids, I'm writing and that I want them to see that is something that I'm, excited about. And they've seen my name, like my son one time, he was flipping through a magazine and he saw my name, that it was printed in there. And he was like, Mom, did you write that? And it was kind of funny, but I did write about that later, because it felt like it was like one of the first times I felt like he was excited about something I did, because it's very hard to compare to your farmer husband to your son who's very excited about farming. And so most of the things I do aren't exciting to him, but because I'm not farming. So him seeing my name in print was kind of cool that he, was excited about that. So yeah, so writing has been a big part of, my motherhood, and just processing it and connecting with other writers online has been the benefit of social media, where I've definitely struggled, the last year, especially. I've taken like, as of today, I haven't been on Instagram in like 2 months. And then this past summer, I deleted Instagram in June and didn't go back until September. It just feels very overwhelming to me a lot of times. And I just find myself often comparing myself to other people, which I find isn't healthy for myself. And I know some people can do really well with social media and not have those issues, but for me, it's kind of been a challenge. And as a writer, I also feel like when I'm online, I'm constantly taking in other people's words instead of just writing my own words. So it feels like it's like a fire hose where I'm taking in way too much. And then I find myself not writing at all, because I'm just intake. And I have to get offline to be able to write and process and have my own output.
I'm so glad you shared that, because I think a lot of times we look to social media to be that connection and that source of like inspiration. But I've definitely experienced that too, where it's like, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's like just completely detrimental, and it's like time to take a break, time to go do something else, time to like bring some new insight from a book or a podcast or something else that maybe has a different perspective.
Right.
Yeah. I love that story about your son seeing your name in the magazine on that piece that you wrote. That's like, I feel like something that's really hard about motherhood, and especially on the farm too, is trying to help your kids see the value in what you do, because it's so second nature. It's like, yes, that's what mom does because, food, and it's expected. And for a long time, I think growing up, I never understood the value of what my mom did, or what role that played in our family and in our way of life. And so that's something that I am like trying to really focus on, especially with my girls, but with my girls and my boys, of helping them understand the value of like taking care of people and preparing things so that people have it easier when they're doing the job that they're trying to do, and making sure everyone is well fed. and trying to help them see the value and like, it's not always joy in that, but that there can be joy in that. And I don't know how we do that better, but I feel like just in general, most of us don't think about those things until we're in the role doing them. And then it's like a shock.
Right. Yeah. I remember a few years ago, my daughter, she was like 4 at the time. And I think she was getting ready to go to school. And so I had the chalkboard, writing, before her first day of school. And I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said, a cooker. And I was like, a cooker? And she said, I want to be a cooker like you. And I remember I first, I kind of felt a pit in my stomach, like, well, that's all she thinks about me is that I cook. But then I tried to remind myself, and this is something I've written about too, is like that she doesn't see me just, I feel like, as a cook. Like she sees like me bringing meals to the field and the people, our employees having lunch at our house. And, that to her, like the meals are like what brings everybody together. So I try, to tell myself and spin it in a way that it's not that that's all she thinks of me. And she saw it as a positive too. It wasn't the negative, and there's nothing wrong with being a cooker. But that she sees it as more than that. It's like how we all come together, and that's the time when the employees and we all get, a break, like that the meal is, something that is really important to all of us.
Absolutely. And if you weren't there doing it, what the alternative would be, that's something I've like kind of had to, when I've been like, well, do I really need to do this? Like, can we just like do another option? Like go, even if it would be like completely a waste of time, but go to town and pick up pizza and bring it out and stuff like that. And that works sometimes, but it's different. Like it matters, I think, that you take the time to prepare the meal and put the time in to like feed them well. And they I know the workers recognize it. And that's so cool that your daughter kind of sees that value too. Awesome. Well, I have loved this conversation. It's been a little bit different than a lot of the conversations on this podcast, but as a woman in ag, I think we have so many of these roles that we fill, and everybody's looks different, and yet we also have a lot of common threads in them. So it's fun to talk about it from this perspective. Is there anything else that you want to share about farm mom life and farm wife life? I think there was a birth story mentioned, maybe.
Yeah. So going back like 10 years, my husband, the story goes that he made a comment when I was pregnant with our first that he could deliver our baby if he had to, because he had delivered a lot of calves. And I rolled my eyes because I was like, babe, I'm not a cow. And he's like, well, I'm just saying. Well, he says to this day that he didn't say that, but I know he did. And so when I was pregnant with our third baby, like I said, we live an hour from where I was planning on delivering the baby. And half of that is gravel roads and half is the highway. So it's 25 miles of gravel and 25 miles of highway. And so I didn't think I was in labor. And I kept telling my husband, I'm not really in labor. This is just Braxton Hicks, because I think I was like 37 weeks pregnant. And my second baby didn't come until 41 weeks. And so I was like, there's no way I'm having a baby right now. Like, it's too early. This isn't real contractions. Well, finally, I decided that, well, maybe we should just go to town and see. So at about 8 a.m, we drove to my in-laws and dropped off the 2 older kids. About 8:25, we left the house, and I am in the pickup, and I was wearing a romper, which I was planning on getting to town to change into something else, but the romper was very comfy, and my water breaks on the front seat of the pickup. And then I reached down and I could feel the baby's head. It wasn't out, but I could feel the head. And I told my husband, and he is like, it had rained the night before, so the gravel roads were just like, slick, and he was trying to drive as fast as he could. And so then all of a sudden, I felt like I needed to push. And so I did. And the baby's head came out. And so I had to take off the romper and I threw it into the back seat of the pickup. My husband and I told it, well, I guess I threw off my romper earlier, and then the head came out. So when the head came out, I told my husband, I said, the head came out. And so he pulled over on the side of the road. And he got in the passenger seat in front of me, and I sat up on the console of the pickup, and I pushed one more time and the baby came right out, and my husband caught the baby. And so as the story goes, he did deliver the baby that he said he did.
Oh my goodness. That is
so we're still like 15 minutes or 20 from town. So then I put the baby on my chest. We didn't have any blankets or anything because we weren't prepared for this. And we just covered the baby in our coats and cranked the heater up, and we drove the rest of the way to town. And then I got there and I hadn't delivered like the placenta or anything. And so when we got there, then I delivered the placenta at the birth center. And then we found out it was a girl because we hadn't found out while we were pregnant what I had or was pregnant with. And then when we had her on the side of the road, like we were both, it was like, so, you know, like the baby, we didn't even take the time to look at the baby. We were just making sure that she was breathing. So she was born for about 20 minutes before we knew she was a girl.
Oh my God.
And then we hung out at the birth center for a few hours, and then we went home. And
that is crazy.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what you were thinking during that time. That's nuts.
Yeah. I definitely didn't think that was going to happen. It was like an out of body experience. Like, you know, it was almost 4 years ago now that happened, but it just really felt, you know, in my mind, like, because people would ask me later, like, did you think you were going to have the baby on the side of the road? And I said, no, like in my mind, like I was just breathing through the contractions. I was just doing what I had to do in the moment. Like it never crossed my mind that we were going to have the baby in the pickup. But my husband later said that he was worried that was going to happen, but he didn't say anything just because of how my contractions ramped up. So it just went from like 0 to 100, like really fast, you know? So looking at the only way, I told my husband after I had the baby to take our picture. And so I have a picture of her on my chest in the pickup.
Aww.
And so that's how so she was born, we think around 9:05 in the morning based on the timestamp in the phone picture. And we had dropped off the kids at 8:25. And you know, so it just like went from my water hadn't broken when we left or anything. And it just happened really fast. So anyway, so now I'm like, I've made other women who live near me who know what happened. Like they're like nervous about having a baby in the pickup. And so they're like, when they're pregnant, they're like, we go to town as soon as we can because I don't want to have a baby in the pickup like you did. So.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. I love a good birth story. It's one of those things too, that you never fully understand what birth is like until after it's happening to you. This was your third one. So were your other two like in the hospital? Did you have like medical intervention and all that stuff, or how was this just like it just happened?
My first was born in the hospital, and I didn't have an epidural, but he was born at the hospital. And then my second, we switched to the birth center with a midwife, and so I didn't have an epidural with her either.
Okay.
And this one was supposed to be with the midwife at the birth center. But we just didn't quite make it there.
Didn't quite make it. Oh my gosh. Well, I was wanting to ask if it was different or how different with an epidural versus without, because there's not very many people that have experienced it both ways, I've found. So I'll have to keep looking for someone who knows it. But you can tell us whether it's different in the birth center and in the truck.
Right.
Probably very different.
Yes. Well, it's just so fast that, you know, the hardest part was like, you know, when you're in labor is like you want to like move around, you know, like, or at least I, you know, either stand and sway or, you know, walk around. And in the pickup, I couldn't do that. So I kept like switching back and forth from like I would face the back seat and wrap my arms around the pickup seat and like during a contraction, and then I would turn back around and face forward, you know. That was the only movement I could really get, but it was just like I wanted to be moving, but so that was the hardest part, was not being able to really like move around.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for sharing that. Now, if there's any real women listening, you've heard the cautionary tale.
Yeah, bring towels.
Yeah, bring towels. Oh gosh. Well, thank you for sharing that, Stacy. Just as some parting thoughts here, any other things that you would like to leave rural women who maybe are feeling the challenges of balancing and kind of getting through the good and the bad on the farm, and then make sure you also tell us where we can find you to follow up with you and see more of your writing.
Okay. I guess my only advice would be it's okay to feel the hard feelings, and to tell your husband when you're struggling. That was, something we struggled with in the early years. Is I would be having a really hard time, but I wouldn't tell my husband because I didn't want to add to his already stressful day. And so I just kept it to myself, which wasn't healthy, which is probably part of the reason I started writing more, is to be able to process it that way. So I would just say it's okay to feel the hard feelings, but, try not to get stuck in those hard feelings. And, it's probably cliche, but like take the minutes, to go outside and watch the sunrise or the sunset. Like the day can still be really hard, but you can also see the really good parts too. And so to find me, for the most part, I'm not really on Instagram, but I'll probably keep coming and going. But I'm just at Stacy Bronec on Instagram. But most often you can find me on Substack, and that's where I write my monthly newsletter, and I share essays on there as well. The easiest way to find me that way is just to go to my website, Stacy, Stacy Bronec, Bronec at StacyBronec.com is my website. And if you go to my website, then you can find my Substack from there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing such good nuggets, and we'll have to check that out. If you've enjoyed spending time with us today, please take a moment to review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or join the conversation on social media. Do you have a topic you would like to discuss or know someone with a story to share? Apply to be a guest on the podcast at farmingonpurpose.com. You can follow the host of Farming on Purpose, Lexi, on your favorite social media platforms for more content by searching for Farming on Purpose. And remember, if you look around your table and aren't inspired by the people there, it's time to find a new seat.